It's Jean Ashton. I retired last June from Anoka Hennepin. I spent 21 years at Coon Rapids High School. I'm licensed multiply in special ed and also in social studies, and taught both of them over the course of my career. The information I'm going to present to you today came out of a decision our district made in 2010 to mainstream all of our learners except center-based, which meant we no longer had essential classes for social studies. So kids who'd never been in the mainstream were now in our classes. Teachers who'd never had students with an IQ of 65 and fidgets had them in class. They were terrified, the teachers. So we did some teacher education. Then last fall, I had an opportunity to work with social studies practicum kids with Rob and Chris and some of those kids, and we presented to them. We found candidates were having a hard time. They just didn't have any special ed background. So you may have some of this information, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time if you do. Sure, there we go. I want to take a look at some of the categories we deal with that your students are going to find in their classroom, and we'll see how quickly we can get through this. Probably the biggest change is the kid with the developmental delay. These are kids who have IQs no higher than 70 when the average is 100. They read and write at a primary level, maybe third grade at most. Obviously, they can't read your textbook. They can't follow your PowerPoint. They don't have the vocabulary, and the pace is way, way beyond what they can do. We see processing deficits, both time and information. Executive functioning is simply not mainstream. Now, I can't speak to elementary, because I didn't work at that level. I don't know if the differences are quite as pronounced. In high school, they are. One of the biggest issues here is the comorbidity. We see DCD along with autism spectrum, some EBD, which is disastrous, and a lot of ADHD. Very, very common. And they won't, your kids may not know that. They may just see DCD, but the secondary issues can be just as important, and the modifications may be different. Everybody's favorite, the EBD kid. This is the I won't rather than I can't student. Usually they're average intelligence or better, but they have all kinds of other issues, often mental health issues. At the high school level, we don't see as much physical behavior as the elementary, but they will tell you where to go and how to get there and where to put it. And dealing with the behaviors to get through that, to teach them, is a challenge, because our first reaction is to send them somewhere else, but that's not really what we want to do. The OHI kid is fairly new. I want to say 1990s. The most common OHI diagnosis is going to be ADHD. That used to be served under EBD. It was the only way to get services. At the high school level, we see the ADHD, we see depression and anxiety, huge in high school students, other health impaired. I had a student with heart and kidney issues. She was OHI. So it can be a very broad spectrum, and the needs are very, very different. This is a medical diagnosis. This is not something your eval team can do or the school psych. This is doctor-based, all of it. Even the ADHD, even though we do the Connors, it's a medical diagnosis. We're seeing more and more of these kids with a traumatic brain injury. Depending on severity, these kids can be center-based level. DCD, lots of processing issues, focus, attention, working memory, all of those things are affected. The young man I had was a center-based kid who couldn't read, couldn't follow a PowerPoint, couldn't take tests. He was in a mainstream class. What do you do with that? The newbie. Autism spectrum is exploding. I'm sure you've seen this in your schools. In fall of 2013, Coon Rapids High School had 90 incoming SPED kids, which was high for us. 24 of them were on the spectrum. And a large number of those kids were behaviorally impacted as well. This can range from the kid who's just a little off, kind of spacey, kind of weird, to throwing furniture, hand flapping, fidgets, physical aggression, huge comorbidity. These kids almost always have other issues. One I forgot to put up here would be speech language, virtually always. It may not be a secondary disability. If it's considered related and a product of the autism, you won't see it, but you will in the classroom. Processing, ability to respond, to even ask questions can be significant. Lots of ADHD, lots of anxiety, lots of OCD, routines, structure. So this one is huge. This is your garden variety SLD. This is also changing. These kids have been in the mainstream forever, but the student who wasn't in the mainstream before is the kid who reads at a second grade level. Usually kids are reading, writing, or math. We're now seeing kids diagnosed as oral language disabilities, and they can look like autism spectrum in their processing, in their ability to communicate, to answer questions, to formulate questions. We have typically said this is a discrepancy-based disability. We measure your IQ, then we do a Woodcock, and if there's 2 standard deviations, then you have a learning disability. This is changing to be more holistic, to include more executive functioning, to not be so numbers-based. What do you do with the student who has an IQ of 80? Can you imagine what their skill level has to be to qualify for a learning disability? And if there's nothing going on otherwise, this kid doesn't get any help. Struggling learners, your students are going to see them as well. The kid who's not SPED, but sure needs help. So there are some gaps here. All right, you guys, do you have any questions about that particular, the common ones? You're all seeing them, right? All right. There's a lot of confusion about what accommodations and modifications are. Like, what's the difference? How do you do this? Very important. They are supports, obviously, for student learning. Accommodations are things we might do for any kid. They do not change the rigor of the instruction. Giving a kid extra time to take a test, if it's not a timed test, doesn't change the rigor, but they may need that because they read slowly. Sending extra books home or books on tape doesn't change it. Where a kid sits in the room, that's an accommodation. However, if you modify the curriculum, the tests, the homework, the instruction, it changes the rigor, and that is the difference. That's a whole different animal. And in the end, it has different consequences for the student as well. Accommodations and modifications are developed in the process of an IEP team meeting. I hate drop-down menus for those on IEPs. Really? This is an individual plan, and these things shouldn't be canned. It should be tailored to the student. Now, yeah, there are a lot of things that help a lot of kids. They are needs-driven. The student who reads slowly probably needs extra time. Maybe for homework, for sure, for tests. The kid who has a writing disability may need your notes because they can't keep up with the PowerPoint. Makes sense. But it's based on need. It has to be explicitly stated in the IEP, especially if we're talking modifications. These aren't things that people are pulling out of a hat. Here's the caveat here. Every district, every school in a district has their own process for informing teachers. And this is going to be a catch for your student teachers. They're going to have to figure out how their school informs. What you're getting is a copy of an accommodations grid that was developed at Coon Rapids High School. The procedure there is that mainstream teachers have to access the information via viewpoint. We use Deepers. And based on a student summary, they have to fill out this grid and submit it to an administrator by the end of the first week of classes, so that administration knows that teachers are aware of student needs and accommodations. It's that important. And if you don't do it, you get a phone call. They're very serious. We use this in our support centers, with our mainstream teachers, with our paras. It's a quick and dirty way of saying, who is the kid? What's the disability? This isn't working. Who do I call? Case manager. What does this kid need? What are the accommodations and modifications? Yeah.
So this is filled out by the classroom teacher?
The classroom teachers are supposed to fill that out in our school. Is there pushback? You betcha. In some schools, special ed provides the student summary report. We used to do it that way. I can't tell you why we went to this. I can tell you that the other high schools in our district don't do it that way. That's how individual this process is. It's critically important for your student teacher to ask, how do I find out who these kids are? They're going to have to ask when they get their first job, because procedures differ. Yes, ma'am?
These kids, when they come to colleges, I know this is not the customers you have serving, but last year I had a chance to observe the Chinese department, and in the summertime, and this child was playing video game in the class, because the teachers are sitting behind in the back, we were watching. He was playing video game. So after the observation, we had a chance to talk to the teacher, and he said this child had a piece of paper from the school and saying that he cannot write Chinese. He has to use computer to type. So in the class, he's the one that was using computer, but he was playing video.
Playing video.
And
I've seen that before.
You know how colleges have syllabus. Every class, we're going to cover this unit, and this is the homework.
Right.
But he would not read that. He would send an email to the teacher and say, what is the homework? Print it to me so that I can do it. So it's very annoying to the teacher.
Oh, extremely. And IEPs do not go to college with the kids, but what does come is what's called a 504 plan, which is basically the same thing. It's a legal mandate that said this child needs these accommodations backed up by often medical information. It's very annoying. Do kids play it? Absolutely. Absolutely. But there probably is a documented need there. But I'd say he's taking advantage. But that is a good point. Does this go to college? Yeah, it does. But it goes in the form of a 504 plan. Yeah. In the high schools, our school psych was in charge of our 504s. It's a little less intrusive, but provides a lot of the same supports. We use it when a student does not qualify for special ed, but clearly has some needs for support. It's a safety net is what it is at the high school level. So important your kids find out. Here's the other thing, there's some confusion. The accommodations and modifications that are made for special ed are your responsibility. You can tell your kids. It is the classroom teacher, not the special ed people. It is the classroom teacher who has to follow the accommodations, modifications that are provided. Now, that doesn't mean that SPED isn't going to help. They will help a lot, starting if there's a para in the classroom. Okay? But this is a legal responsibility of the classroom teacher. Failure to comply, if you ignore, you don't try, you lose the legal protection of the union, of the school district. Now it's your house, your cabin, your boat. There's individual liability for not doing this. That's one reason our administration required teachers to turn this in. It's very serious business. And parents do get after it if their kids' needs are not being met. Not always the students' or the teacher's fault. Mainstream teachers, your student teacher, if they are invited to an IEP meeting, should make every effort to go. I mean, sometimes you're in class and you cannot do that. This is also a legal mandate. You want to provide feedback. The feedback that the mainstream teacher should provide is not just grades, because we can get those. We want to know how your student relates to other students, how they relate to me. Do they ask me questions? Do they do their work on time? Do they ask for help if they need it? Self-advocacy is huge. Do they interact with other kids in the classroom? What are those interactions like? As well as work habits, okay? Very, very important stuff. Yeah, the grades are important, but as I said, teachers all have access to that. Student teachers need to attend those meetings just like they would go to conferences. It's extremely important. Because mainstream teachers are a part of the IEP team that develops the modifications, the accommodations, they need to be part of it. All right.
Excuse me, I just have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Who else has to attend that meeting? Doesn't an administrator have to
Yes.
be there?
Yes.
And is that illegal if the administrator's not at the table?
Technically, yeah. Will they sign off on it sometimes? Yeah. A department lead for SPED can act as an administrator. It doesn't have to be an AP. You can designate an administrator. Another special ed teacher can serve that purpose too. You have to have special ed. You have to have mainstream. At the high school, usually a school counselor they are considered the mainstream teacher if you need one. You may need the nurse there if this child has any medical issues. Speech person, OT, PT, DAPE, you name it, any specialist involved, and it can be quite, we often have county mental health workers, we have probation officers. It can be a big list, but yes, you have to have a designated administrator. Okay, these are pretty common. All of these are really accommodations. The extra time, giving notes to a student. I frequently would, depending on the kid, have them try to take the notes and then provide them afterwards. If they can't take the notes, I gave them a marker and had them highlight as we went along. My TBI kid was only able to do that. You can print PowerPoint slides 3 to a page that have lines on the side, and kids can try to put down a keyword. You want them engaged. You want them paying attention, not playing video games on their computers while you're giving them notes. but they may not be able to take them. Preferential seating, especially with your ADHD kid, because then you're not yelling at the back of the room, you can stand by their desk. Sometimes kids on the spectrum do better if they have a teacher right there. If your student teacher has the option of rearranging their room, I would recommend a center aisle with desks facing. My room, I was able to arrange that way. I was never more than 3 eyeballs from any kid, which kind of kept them engaged. It was hard to sleep. Oh, all right, sorry. I had to entertain my colleagues at school, so they needed a few visuals. Books, sometimes you'll send them home. Most publishers, at least at the secondary level, have online books, so the kids can access that automatically. We also had a system through our special ed library where we could order an iPad for the kid or an iPod and have books downloaded through Learning Ally. The kids can do that on their own device if the case manager, this is not the mainstream teacher, documents the need. So then they have the audio books. A lot of kids do better if they see it and hear it. And if they use their own device, we don't worry about them losing them. Kids need breaks. They need to be able to get up and leave the room. A lot of our EBD kids need this kind of a break. We had kids on the spectrum who needed to get up and walk in the middle of class. It's just the tension level. We have kids who twiddle pens and use fidgets and have stuffed animals. You name it, it's in class. And this stuff is all written into an IEP, believe it or not. Access to a support center, a counselor, your AP, your case manager, the nurse can be written in. These are modifications. Whenever you modify and you change the rigor, you're also looking at a modified grade. And your student teachers need to be aware of that. If you start changing the rigor of assignments and tests, you are by default changing the grade level, the rigor of that grade to a modified grade. Eliminating answers. We've eliminated up to half of the answers on tests for some of our kids. Having them take it home, use the book. It's doable. If it's written in the IEP, it may be subject specific. The kid may need this in science, but they may be able to get by okay in Government 9 without doing this. So it may be written that way too. Word banks, often. Yep.
I'm sorry, I have a question about what you meant by changing the grade.
It changes the rigor of the grade itself. So if you change the rigor of the assignments and tests in particular, your child is going to end up with a modified grade.
But what does that mean?
Well,
like a lower grade, or what does that mean?
No, it might be just a P grade, and I'll talk about that, where they don't get a letter grade at all. When college look at it, a lot of our kids are not going to go to college, but some of them are. A P grade simply means they made an effort and we're giving them the credit for the class with certain stipulations. It won't say modified on their transcript, but if you start modifying assignments, you have to mentally be prepared to use the same standard when you give them a final grade. So that kid who may get a D or an F probably won't, because you're going to modify their whole grade because the curriculum had to be modified for them. Administratively, unless it's a P grade, it's not going to show up at all. But you're not going to judge kids by the same standard that you're using for other kids across the board. Does that make some sense?
Well, it sounds like you're saying they would receive
a lower grade? It might be, but not usually.
So handle this differently?
Yes.
So if it's just like, it's a way of flagging a grade is like, okay, they earned an E, but they earned it with these modifications, or they earned an A, excuse me, but they earned it with these modifications. So it may not mean anything to anyone outside the district. It's just for some teachers who feel more comfortable, like recognizing that they modified it. And a lot of teachers who say, well, I'm dumbing it down or whatever, they feel more comfortable if they can flag that this has been a modified This will be a point of divergence from how we approach it in ESL, where language modifications are necessary and not indicative of lessening the cognitive rigor. And so just keep that in mind, that we don't really conceptualize it the same way when we're talking about English learners, so this might be more specific to special ed.
Yeah, I think it is. And it doesn't go anywhere unless you're actually not giving a letter grade. Okay? But teachers do have an issue with giving an A to the kid in the essential class when what's an A supposed to mean?
And we're really at the end of our time, so maybe we could take a couple more questions. And
Oh,
then,
okay. Oh, and this is, I'll just do this behind me. This is the P grade. Yeah, if anybody has any, yeah, Tim.
There's one thing that I've run into with my teacher candidates where their cooperating teachers are citing privacy issues and not wanting to allow the candidates to see what accommodations are even supposed to be.
You can't do that if the teacher is, student teacher is responsible in that classroom, administratively and every other way. I don't think that that's an appropriate call. And especially if they're working with these kids, you really they need that information for the education and for their own well-being. Sometimes. You'd have to check, but I don't think that's appropriate. So I guess at some level the university maybe needs to have a conversation and say, yes, and the student teachers need to understand data privacy for sure, but you have to have that information to work with kids.
So when you're acting as a teacher, as a student teacher officially with the U of M, you should have access to all that test scores, ID information.
Yes.
If there is a miscommunication or something, start with your program lead in your content area, and then connect with partnership team.
Okay.
And
Yep.
clarify that.
And this is part of it. Talk to the cooperating teacher. Obviously, that's not an issue. You want to talk to the case manager, but again, in that situation, you need to have a different conversation rather than going around the cooperating teacher. Parents need to be, student teachers should be able to call parents and counselors, and administrators want to know too if there's something going on in your classroom. But your paras, if you have them in the classroom, are probably your first line of information. Miranda and I were talking this morning. Sometimes you have singletons, doubletons. You have kids in a class that is not supported. And your candidates need to understand they have to check that out. Whatever the school procedure is, they need to know if there are special ed kids in their unsupported classes as well, and what their needs are and modifications. Okay. They may have to work with paraprofessionals. This is a conversation they need to have with the para. What is the para's role? What has the para done in the classroom before? Start with that. Discipline generally falls on the teacher and not on the paras, but those lines need to be defined clearly. And that's a conversation your student teacher has directly with the support people.